seen it, should apostrophe VE. No.
You get, I'll find you examples. I've
Okay.
certainly seen it.
Okay.
It's a phenomenon known as hypercorrection, where people know that something's going on and they want to fix it because they think what's pronounced apostrophe VE is bad,
Okay.
but they correct it wrong.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I've seen.
If you cruise the web and read blog comments, for example, you see it a lot.
Yeah, I'm not a cruiser.
In student papers also, yes.
Well, Eileen only gets student papers in Spanish,
Yeah.
so she spared that particular one.
Oh, thank you.
I'll look for them.
Margaret, it was very interesting what you said, and what intrigued me particularly is there eventually an observed factor which determines these semantic changes, or they can occur randomly?
I would say neither random nor any one factor. Usually change is a matter of a series of factors. Things like pen and plume are the easy ones. I mean, individual words, and there's a whole series, for example, of words in English where there's a verb where there was first a noun, like hammer, nail, things like that. When you get to even to compounds and grammatical elements, it's usually several factors working together. So with my subjunctive stuff, you have to look at the fact that there's been a phonological and then morphological falling together of indicative and subjunctive in not every verb by any means, but the ade verb. So it's the biggest, the most extensive, the most productive. I always test my subjunctives on irregular verbs if I'm asking people the judgments, because they're clear.
Right.
So you've got sound change as a factor. You've got loss of ability to recognize categories as a factor. You have also, I would say, the schema change, which is a factor. All kinds of things. Eventually, you can come up with a series of motivations, but you can't isolate. Ellen.
Margaret, I think I just missed this, but if in your argument that is a language change that can be seen as a schematization,
I mean, potentially.
Right. Well, what's the meaning of that?
I think I don't know, because I don't know what people will do with it. But my guess would be it's something that it gets bleached and it becomes a glue between going, should, something modal-like. Particularly if we start in, and we do in fast speech, saying them as if it were a single unit.
Okay.
It doesn't hold up if you think about emphatic uses, because then the main verb would,
But I can see that in terms of the modals. What if, another argument though would be is that English is simplifying complex modals, right?
No.
We don't.
Yeah, very possibly that's part of it.
I didn't say that. That's not really my question.
Yeah.
But I think that explains the ones that are before verbs, but why would this same thing, would the schematization be able to explain why the same thing is happening in 7A and
The kind of, sorta.
Yeah.
Those are used before verbs. As in, I kind of love you.
Oh, so if it can function as some kind of modal, then even when it's in a nominal context, you can have the...
Probably that's what I would say, and maybe, now I'm really playing. Maybe you get a category split after a while.
But would that have to be semantically motivated?
I think, okay, let me think.
Because you're saying the schematization would be verbal glue, but that's...
But I after a point, it would come back to some kind of motivation because people tend to want to make sense of things, of grammatical pieces.
But at the same time, I think that the grammatic element does have an impact on the semantic formation.
For me, grammar is semantics. Now, to be fair to Ellen on this, I'm also struggling with whether all grammar is semantics or not. I mean, I promised an abstract to a conference on this, using the theory that if I ask the question, maybe I'll find an answer before I have to present. But I think what I would claim, Ellen, looking at other cases in history, that people eventually do want to assign meaning to something. And that eventually, if this ever happens, and it's tenuous at best, this schwa would take on some kind of meaning as a grammatical element. Because I don't differentiate grammatical elements from full words, except as a matter of degree in terms of having meaning. One of the best examples I ever had was when I was telling an intro linguistics class about competing past participles, dived and dove, and that it seems to be a meaningless change. It's an older and a younger form, and people hesitate. And Janice Van Quellen, who is now practicing law somewhere, raised her hand and said, "Oh no, they have two separate meanings." And one of them had to do with self-propelled entry into water, and the other was being forced to enter into water. And I saw her several years ago, and I said, "Janice, I remember this sort of from the class." And she said, "Oh yes, two different meanings. I've never met anyone else who has two different meanings from it, but people look for meaning." Which is obvious to you. But if I'm playing a predictive game, I will predict that as Carmelina and then
Margaret, linguistics is not my field of expertise, but I understood categorization and abstraction, but when you talk about motivation, I don't have it clear.
Motivation is, the way I'm using it, is explaining by looking backward. It's sort of the opposite of prediction in that sense. You can look back and motivate what happened, even though you can't look forward and say it will happen again. Certainly not at any given time in any given place.
It means that you cannot enunciate any kind of law.
Right, exactly. And the more I do linguistics, the more I'm wary of laws of any kind.
In general.
In general, yeah. Walter.
Yeah, there's a sociolinguistic variation here that might be helpful to you. Because in African American vernacular English, there are three ways in which you can refer to something that's going to happen. It's will, gun, and gonna. So, sort of, you're going to get a licking. There's something that is potentially going to happen. But you're going to get a licking. It's going to happen sooner. So, and I have a paper on will, gun, and gonna, in which people have sort of seen that there's a distinction between gun and gonna in terms of the celerity with which you will get something done. Will is much more in this. So African Americans use all three: will, gun, and gunner, in terms of the distance away. So already that's a sociolinguistic variation.
Are they used in different contexts?
In the same context.
But different times?
Yes, yes.
Well, there are other ones,
Right.
I've read of that in other languages that I don't know, where you get verb forms based on how far in the future, or adverbials that, Liliana.
Yeah, about your subjunctive example in 4A.